everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Haley, and I'm the Hope for HIE social worker. Today, our Peer Perspectives panel is about HIE and autism. So I want to thank Crystal and Francesca for being with us today. They are our panelists who are going to share about their journey with HIE and autism. Today, we're just going to talk, and they're going to share their stories and share about their journey. And so please follow back up with us. We have a lot of resources in the Hope for HIE community. If you need any additional resources or want any additional information, please send me an email. My email is Haley, Haley, at hopeforhie.org. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to our amazing panelists and let them do a quick introduction to get us started.
I can go first. I'm Francesca. My son is 6 years old, almost 6, 5.5. He was born in London, where he had a not a great delivery, which resulted in HIE, among other issues. He was diagnosed with autism at about 1.5 years, and we moved back to the US, where I'm from, to New York around that time.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Crystal. My kiddo Colby is 10.5. We are in the Northeast in the US, and he was born at 37.5 weeks by emergency C-section. He spent 5 weeks in the NICU and has been quite the journey ever since, which eventually landed us with an autism diagnosis officially at 3.5.
Thank you for sharing. So one of the first things we're going to talk about today is just the early signs that you experience with your child and then the diagnosis process. One thing I do want to remind everyone is this is not medical information. We're not giving any type of advice. These are just parents in our Hope for HIE community sharing their story and sharing about their child. So if both of you would just share a little bit about the early signs, the diagnosis process, and maybe kind of the providers you saw, the timeline for the diagnosis and the appointment, that would be great.
All right, so I didn't have a lot of information about autism when I started to notice quirky different things that he was doing. The first thing that I noticed was he was about 1.5, and he would run into the kitchen, hit the microwave 3 times, like put in a number 3 times, run through the rest of the house, and when he heard it beep that it cleared, he would run back through, and kept repeating that. And I was like, huh, that's interesting. I wonder if that's just like a little thing he does, or, people had heard of OCD and repetitive things. So I said, maybe it's a touch of OCD. I wasn't sure. And then I started to notice that he was building Legos in a tower only. There was no other thing happening. It was just as tall as he could get it. It could only be a tower. He would line up his toys, and when he chose not soft toys, never soft toys, he would find like 3 figures or 3 cars or 3 Legos actually, and would hold 3 in his hand wherever we went. He had to have those 3 objects. So that is kind of when I started to notice things. But again, I wasn't really sure about the autism piece because I wasn't educated in anything autism related. We finally got him to the developmental pediatrician at 2.5 years old for his first testing. And we were told by someone on his team that, hey, I think you might want to look into this. So it wasn't on my radar, and had that professional not said, hey, maybe look into this, I don't know that I would have, or at least not back then. So I'm grateful for that. It took a while to get into the developmental pediatrician. At 2.5, he received a quote unquote working diagnosis because he just scored onto the spectrum. And because of his brain injury and because of his social skills. He was too familiar with adults because he had been in early intervention and had many therapists. He was too comfortable with the people testing him, so they thought that his social skills were too good, too good to be truly autistic. So we had to repeat the testing a year later at 3.5 years old. And that is when he moved a few more markers up into the spectrum and was given a level 1 diagnosis.
So my journey was slightly different. I was pretty familiar with autism going into things. Um, in the UK, the doctors had warned us that with my son has a stroke and HIE. With both of those diagnoses, he had a higher likelihood of getting an autism diagnosis later in life. We had speech and feeding right from the beginning, and they had already noticed he wasn't following a point as an infant. If you would hold him up in front of your face, he wouldn't look at you in the eyes. He would avert his gaze to not look at you in the face, which is not typical for most babies. And then even, by almost 10 months old, where other babies, they're clapping, you clap, they clap, you go back and forth reciprocally. He wasn't doing any of that. Um, when we moved back to the US, he had the full suite of early intervention support. Um, and at that point, I asked if he could get an autism diagnosis. There was a little back and forth because it was during the pandemic, and they were, he's got pretty much everything except ABA. And there are so few providers that are doing ABA at home, it's almost not worth it. But then I pushed for just to get the autism diagnosis at that point, which was done again because of the pandemic, virtually over Zoom, where we used the agency that had been contracted for EI services. Um, I think at that point he was diagnosed as level 2. I think at this point he's probably floating between level 2 and level 3. But he's had that diagnosis then since 1.5 when we did start ABA, which was basically the only difference from before and after the autism diagnosis.
Thank you both for sharing. The next thing we want to talk a little bit about, and you both have kind of brought it up briefly, but just navigating early intervention with your child, and then navigating the school system, whether that's preschool, early intervention, elementary school, middle school, just anything relating to navigating like autism and IEP in the school process. If you could also share, what you wish somebody would have talked to you about as you're navigating those early years and then transitioning to school. And then also, I know you've talked a little bit about physical, occupational, speech, ABA, and feeding therapies. If you want to share any more about that, that would be.
I can go on. So I started in the UK, so in the NHS system, which is quite different from the US system. So all of our early intervention support continued from the hospital to the home. So he was in the NICU for 5 weeks as well. And so the way it works there is that our local hospital provided all of the EI services in the home. So we started off right off the bat with PT, speech, OT, feeding. And then I started looking into other therapies like ABA and prompt. And I realized that the UK didn't have a lot of that. And then as he was getting older, he was actually we also did a lot of intensives in the UK, which are pretty popular there. So we did these like programs where we would go away for a week and do kind of intensive activities. And then as he was getting better with especially PT and OT, they started reducing services. And so that's when we started looking into both private in the UK as well as a move back to the US. When we transitioned back to the US, I had signed him up for EI before we arrived. So I did a move, I don't know, like a move trip before to sign him up using my parents' home address. And then because EI services take quite a while, at least in my state, to get up and running, it can take a couple months. And so by the time I landed, I had all of the therapies lined up. I also had leveraged my network extensively to find people who knew people. So all of the first wave of EI providers are people who are friends of family who recommended each other. And then, as he grew up and aged out of EI, we went into the district program for preschool, where he went to a special needs preschool, and now he's transitioned to the local kindergarten enclosed ABA class.
Thank you.
So early intervention started, we were told at discharge from the NICU that we needed to work with birth to 3 service, and they would come home to our home and work with him. His case manager for early intervention was also his physical therapist in home. We eventually also added OT and speech through home. So that started around 3 months and it lasted to 3 years old, at which time we also did some outpatient because I didn't feel that early intervention always provided what he seemed to need in my viewpoint. I had a lot of he's so cute, he's doing so well. And I'm like, oh, okay, but what about this? What about that? So I didn't realize how much I would have to advocate for my child to make sure that he was getting the supports and therapies he needed. So he also had some outpatient OT, PT, speech and feeding as well before 3. In addition to that, home. Then he transitioned to a pre-K program. It was for when he was 3 and 4 years old. So he went for 2 years. It was an integrated program. So it was 50% neurotypical kids, 50% special needs of any kind children. It was a very small classroom, maybe 8 children. And it was just a morning program for him. And he did receive some light services. He did have an IEP at that time. And he had many, maybe what you would call paras in that integrated program in the room. So he didn't have anything one-to-one. And when he transitioned into the regular public schools for kindergarten, they decided to do a neuropsych eval on him. And they compared it to a year prior outpatient psych eval he had neuropsych, and they said their findings were much different. He was not severe enough autistically to receive services at their school. And I had purposely moved to that town because it was larger and I assumed they would have a better program. But instead they took away his IEP. So he was 5.5 in kindergarten. A year later, we moved to a small town and he got his IEP back. He has had para support throughout the years. He's now ending 5th grade. He's coming to the end of 5th grade. So we're moving into the middle school here for next year. He has had para support, never one-to-one, but they definitely work with him heavily. He has access to the special education room as needed. He just started receiving PT and OT for the first time ever in the past couple of months at school, which prompted me to, because we had ended outpatient about 4.5 years ago, prompted me to have him reevaluated. So he's also now getting PT and OT outside of school as well, because they only take care of the educational needs at school, which makes things challenging. He did have ABA outpatient for a short period of time around the time he was 5 to 6 years old. It did prove helpful at the time, but since we have found that we haven't benefited greatly from that service for my child. So we've opted out for now, but who knows in the future. He has had speech on and off throughout the years, but currently he is not utilizing speech therapy. And it'll be interesting when we have to do the transition of care into the middle school where all of his supports will change for next year.
Thank you both for sharing. I know the topic of early intervention, navigating into school, especially in the preschool, kindergarten ages, and then again, the middle and high school transitions is a really big topic that families are navigating. One of the next things I want to talk about for a little while is just how you and your family unit navigate social interactions, utilizing social skills groups, or have you done any adaptive sports or activities? Tried anything like virtual hangouts, and then also navigating sibling, cousin, peer relationships, and just kind of really anything that falls under the umbrella of social interaction.
So in many respects, we're quite lucky because my son is sensory seeking. And so when we bring him in social situations, he is thrilled. The more chaos, the more people, the more noise, the better, which I know is not true for a lot of autistic families. So we take him everywhere we go. We don't have we don't avoid going to any place. We have learned he is an eloper. So we have learned in certain situations, we have to put him in a cart or we have to bring our big wagon thing that we can put him in. When we go to restaurants, we have to make sure there's enough stimulation for him at the table so that he will sit, which usually means an iPad or a phone. With regards to family and friends, all of them know he had a boo-boo on his brain at birth, which has resulted in him having autism amongst other things. So all of the kids his age know. It pops up every now and again. Why doesn't he speak? When is he going to speak? And so being able to answer those questions in an age-appropriate way has been fun and interesting to navigate. We did try a lot of adaptive sports and non-adaptive. So we had put him in when he was really small, when you really couldn't tell, we had put him in regular soccer and swimming. He didn't really like either of those. We tried adaptive soccer and adaptive sports. Not really his thing. He does like adaptive swimming. So we go to special needs swimming every week. We also do some private therapies. We do speech on a horse, which he quite enjoys, which is at a farm. So he gets to play with animals and go horseback riding, while at the same time, in theory, getting speech therapy. And so we've found activities and sports and things that meet his needs in a way that is fun and not too taxing for us as a family or him as a kid, because he still needs to have fun.
So socially over the years, Colby has always, he's been great with teachers and therapists, obviously not his age group, right? And then he tended to aim towards kids that were younger than him because I think that their parallel play was the thing that kind of bonded them. Like they didn't have to really interact with each other, but they could like be there and be together. He still tends to get along for a longer period of time with younger children. However, that's still, it doesn't, it doesn't last very long. He tends to have the past few years like one best friend, but typically that best friend is in his grade, is a boy, is on his bus. And he's on the little bus. So there's not a lot of options for friend making at that point. Um, he doesn't attend the lunchroom because it's too overwhelming sensory wise. So he sits in his special education room for lunchtime, and they allow him 2 days a week to have two friends from his classroom join him. So that's his choice of who he picks. So that's been really nice to know that he's not just sitting in there alone while he's having his lunch. And then he also has a social skills lunchtime with the school social worker. So there's a group of children that have lunch together once a week. And then he also has another social skills group at the end of his week, one time a week, where he gets to work on all of those skills because he has withdrawn from doing much socially. We actually tend to not leave him behind, but if I can manage someone to stay home and watch him and be with him, I will go do those errands or go to family gatherings or what have you without him, because he doesn't last as long as you'd like to stay, right? So if it's a family function, you might want to be there for 3 hours, and he might do okay for the first half hour, and then we would need to cut it short. And there's just no point because he doesn't get any enjoyment, as far as I can tell, out of being at those places or events, that it's just better for him and he's happier if he can be at home. We did try, he loved soccer. He loved soccer since he was a tot and he could walk. Um, he did recreational soccer for a couple of years. And then with COVID shut down for a couple of years, they didn't really have those going on in our town. So when it came back up, I tried again, and day one, he quit. So then I tried adaptive soccer. He went twice and quit. That just wasn't his thing anymore. Um, we've tried karate 3 times. Twice was with like a regular class with karate, and they would try to give him some one-on-one attention, and then he would have to participate in the class. And that never went well for more than a few weeks. And luckily, this past summer, I was able to find a one-on-one instructor for him. And he has been going once a week since July. He was even able to get his next belt color. So I was very proud of him and excited for him that he got to finally do the thing he really, really enjoys in the way that works best for him. So that's been very successful for us. But that is kind of it for activities.
Thank you both for sharing. I know these are topics that many families are going to want to hear and, have you share your experience. The next thing we're going to talk about is navigating sensory and behavioral needs. Francesca, I know you mentioned sensory seeking. So this is kind of a place where if you guys want to share a little bit more in detail about the sensory seeking and sensory avoidance behaviors of your child, any mental health needs that you've navigated, or just navigating, meltdowns or like behaviors and kind of how you navigate that, whether that's in the home setting, the school setting, out in the community setting, whatever you'd like to share.
I mean, like I said, Luca, my son, is sensory seeking. So that means he will run towards anything loud, stimulating. He really likes very deep pressure a lot. So he will, run up to people for squishes if he knows they're like, my father is someone who will like give him a bear hug, and he loves that sensory input. That also means that when he's frustrated, he will headbang because that is a sensory input that he likes, and it soothes him. So trying to find ways to get his sensory input that he needs is typically our challenge. So at school, they've experimented with a variety of weighted vests, constrictive vests, weighted lap pads, brushing, squeezing at certain intervals. He was on a sensory diet for a while. Um, Honestly, none of that has really made a huge impact because it has to be on his schedule and not like timed at 30-minute intervals. So sometimes he really wants squishes and sometimes he's get off of me right now. So it's very variable in that respect. You have to be able to read him to know what he needs at that moment, which he's nonverbal, so being able to read his subtle cues can take time to figure out. Um, I think for us, the challenge has been with other kids where he loves a big gesture and a big sound. So what's the biggest sound you can get a kid to do is scream or cry. And so he's realized if he scratches kids, especially in the face, they will tend to have a big reaction, which is not socially acceptable to run up to friends and scratch them in the face or pull their hair. And so we've been working on that because he does want to interact with kids. He likes kids. It's just he doesn't know how to interact properly. And his particular favorite is small children because they tend to cry the most. And so we have to be on our guard with smaller children who make lots of fun sounds. Um, um, and so we've worked a lot on getting kids to do high fives and like hugs and things as alternative options for interaction and um, sensory stimulation.
My kiddo is, and what you said about you can't quite read the needs at the time, like that can be tricky. Um, Same with my kiddo, but he's a seeker and an avoider. So then it makes it that much more difficult. Do you need the input? Do you not need the input? Um, my kiddo wears headphones a lot, but it's normally to input noise of his choosing. Yes, he wants to block it at like when they have assemblies at school, they give him headphones because being there is too loud and they give him the option to also leave and view that on a screen from his special ed room. But he wears headphones almost all the time with very loud YouTube streaming, music. He loves retro games, so anything retro gaming music is his favorite. And he has picked up spinning the past year and a half. So that's been a huge regulation tool for him. He will spin for upwards of 20 and 30 minutes at a time in the living room, rocking out to his gaming music. That's his happy place, and he has to do that as soon as he gets home from the bus, because he needs that regulation time. So that is one thing that I know is a guarantee. Sometimes he likes hugs, sometimes he doesn't. Um, he's very loud himself, even though he doesn't enjoy loud sounds. When he was a tot, he would run and crash into the couch again and again and again because he just needed that. I've tried weighted blankets, they weren't super helpful for him. A compression vest, that wasn't super helpful. He has the oral sensory as well, so he will bite and chew on his fingers even to this day. We have tried the Z-Vibe, we have tried Chewy tubes. They were all helpful for a very long time, but now he's kind of like, well, I don't want to I'm just going to use my fingers. Like he chooses that rather than a tool of other kinds. Oh, and I did catch him the other day chewing on the wire to his headphones, which isn't helpful. If he needs those, he's got a wired pair and a wireless pair because wireless is better for when he spins. Um, so yeah, and then he overstuffs his mouth when he eats, um, because he just needs to feel that full feeling. Oh, and soft clothing. It has to be sweatpants, t-shirts, sweatshirts, no tags, nothing stiff. It has to be like I bought him something, it was almost like a textured Henley of some sort. And I was like, oh no, I don't know if I didn't know it was textured. I don't know if it's gonna go well. And he I was actually okay with it because the material itself was soft enough. So because we had tried brushing when he was littler and it didn't seem to improve anything for him at the time. But yeah, it's oh goodness, there's so much sensory related. I could go on and on for quite a while.
Yeah, I did forget to add my son will is still chewing things. So especially when we go out, we have to watch what he sticks in his mouth. Um, he loves eating sand, rocks, like anything that's not going to kill him at this point. I'm like, yeah, he's eating enough sand. I don't think that's going to kill him. So I just let it go. Because there's some battles that just not worth fighting. Um, but uh, being mindful of the things that he's going to stick in his mouth is also something that's I'm constantly on the guard for when we go out.
Um, and then I think we were supposed to bring up the siblings part or
Sure, that'd be great.
or cousins or whatever. My kiddo has three siblings. They're all older than him. Um, they know he needs his space. They know he only has a slight tolerance for anything outside of his world, anything that makes him happy in his world. But they will push him. And I appreciate them pushing sometimes because I think that it's probably healthy for him to be pushed and it's by like a loving family member. But definitely it can get tricky because I'm like, no, 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 your brother needs quiet. Your brother needs to just not be provoked right now. Like let him be in his little world. He's happy. But they love him dearly. They but it's tricky because why does he need so much time? Why does he need so much of your attention and all that? But his brother is 9 years older, so he just loves up on him so much. They don't have a lot in common outside of gaming at this point because of the age difference, but they probably have the strongest bond. And he'll come home and he'll be like, "Oh, is he home? Is he home? I want to go show him what I learned at karate." So they definitely love having each other. Um, but yeah, that's like I said, it's helpful that someone loving can push him out of his comfort zone in a safe space like home so that he can maybe figure out how to regulate in that situation and maybe even help with social skills piece. But that does lead us into meltdowns at times. When my kiddo has meltdowns, there's not a lot that I can do to pull him out. I offer a hug in case he wants it. I offer him to talk it out with me. But typically he just needs his happy place, which is, all right, can we get you your headphones? Can we get you your music? Can we get you your video games or a YouTube thing that you want to watch that will make you happy? Um, but meltdowns are still tricky. It's a work in progress to figure out what best helps him in those situations.
Absolutely. Thank you both for sharing about all that. I know that's something that, anyone navigating autism diagnosis is kind of figuring that out. The other thing we want to talk about briefly is just navigating safety. That's such a big topic in the autism community. And I know, Francesca, you've mentioned elopement. So if you just want to talk about, I know you discussed your wagon, but any other things like door locks, alarms, other things that you do to help with the elopement and just anything under the safety umbrella of, how do you navigate safety when you're dealing with a child with autism?
Sure, I could start then. So as my husband put it, we have nerfed our house. So basically, um, everything in our house that is dangerous, it's still like having a 1.5 or 2 year old, except he's taller now, so things go further back in cabinets that he can't reach. Um, as far as eloping, we have special locks on most of our doors. Um, thanks to the cerebral palsy, he's not so great at manipulating doorknobs and locks, so we don't have like super crazy locks yet. But it is something we think about, and we will restrict access to some rooms that have more dangerous things than others. Our garden is fenced in. He's basically never alone because things happen. Like I said, it's like having a clever 18-month-old that can get into more stuff. He doesn't have a sense of danger of cars driving down the road can squish him. He will just dart across the street to say hello to the neighbor's dogs. Um, and so as I said, in public, we'll either have a firm grip on his hand or he still fits into one of the strollers. And then we bought a adaptable wagon, which is, you could get a special needs discount, but it goes up to like 125 pounds or something like that. So we can grow with him. And we'll plop him in that and take him around. And then as far as, like I said, he does mouth a lot of objects. I'm constantly on the lookout for things that are, poisonous. During the fall, we look out for mushrooms, which he would stick in his mouth if he saw them. So, things like that, trying to ensure that he doesn't poison, get himself killed or squished in, you know, situations that for most kids is benign.
Yeah, we had dealt with a lot of that for quite a while. It's starting to settle down in some areas. Um, I had lived on a busy street. I had all the doors secured with extra chains and the baby nub safety things. And then I moved to an apartment where like all the cars drove right up to the front of the apartment, and I was like, oh no. Then there were gates and the locks and the chains, and then he also doesn't really have a sense of that danger. He's starting to a little bit now, but it's normally like a panic. It's not a sense of calm realizing what's happening. He's like, oh my God, I want to get hit. Like, and then I'm like, okay, no, we just have to be careful. We have to be safe and guide him with the safety precautions. So up until a few years ago, a lot of that was happening with the household safety. And then when I was taking him out, I did at one time even get one of those tethered backpacks because I wanted to give him that sense of freedom and know that he was still safe. He was like within arm's length reach, should I need to. But I think it gave me the assurance that he was going to be okay because I could reach him quickly and he wasn't going to get lost. I've lost him a few times over the years in maybe a store or, not for very long, but it was just long enough where I was like, oh, I wish there was a way I could just keep him closer and safer. But again, a lot of that has dissipated because we don't take him as many places in the more current years. At school, it's been a safety concern. So there are a couple of times a week I need to pick him up early or right at the time that school buses and children are being released to their parents. And at our school, there are probably 100 cars that wait in that line for pickup. He At the very beginning of this year, he couldn't wait for me because I was in the line. He couldn't wait for me and then was very, very unsafe at school. And the school is like, all right, hold up. We want you to come up and park where his bus does and even park in a handicap spot if you need. And we will hand deliver him to you right at dismissal time so that there's no waiting period because he was so super unsafe with what had happened that we were like, we have to put something in place because this is not going to be okay. And it's worked very well. And I do still, and he is 10 and a half, and I'm sure it's going to start looking silly to others, but I still hold his hand a lot. Come on, buddy, come with mommy. All right, did you look for cars? But I still have his hand because I talked to him the other day about that. He's like, what? I looked for cars, but he didn't really. I watched him. I knew it was safe. So I gave him that freedom of choice. But at the same time, I was like, that would have been so horrible. So then we have to talk about it. We talk about it so much. So much. I still get him on and off the bus. And I don't know when I'll feel okay enough to stop that. We luckily live on a much quieter road at the moment, but it's definitely a worry.
Absolutely. The last thing we're going to talk about is just support. I want to share just briefly, Hope for HIE has support for families. So if you could share a little bit about how you've utilized our support and other supports, but we do have support groups. We have a autism subgroup in the Facebook group community. Have a child life specialist and a social worker on staff. So again, feel free to utilize those. But if you guys would like to share a little bit about the supports you may have used, such as like family, friends, community, childcare, and maybe connecting with other families navigating autism as well.
Yeah, I don't know of any families personally, so I was that are dealing with autism to begin with. Never mind the combo of HIE and autism. So I have connected with a few families through the HIE group that are also, their child also has the diagnosis of autism. And I did find a state-based Facebook group, like parents with children with autism kind of group, where you can ask questions, or they, share events that are happening or groups that are happening. Typically not near my area, unfortunately. My area is very quiet. My area of the state is very quiet with supports. So I would have to drive about an hour and a half for some of these things. And then you have to outweigh, because he doesn't do well on long drives. So we have to outweigh, like, are we really going to get what we want out of this? But it's nice to know that it's there and that we have it. And my mom has been a huge supporter, because she has helped me raise him since he was one. So she is a huge support. She's now out of my state, which is unfortunate. Um, but she continues to be the person I call when I'm up against something and I need advice, or I need just somebody to listen who understands.
I guess for me, the HIE network helped quite a bit when he was in the NICU. One of my friends had actually found it, and it's funny because I didn't even think to look on Facebook, and she's like, "Here's a Facebook group. Go talk to them." So that helped quite a bit. Like I said, my son also has a stroke at birth, so like I go to both of those groups quite a lot, especially in the beginning. Um, Now, in terms of groups, I'm fairly active in the local SEPTA, which is a special needs PTA group. And then there's quite a lot of, I'm in a fairly urban, suburban area, so there's quite a lot of, uh, moms with kids with X groups. And so I go to some of those activities with my son, or some of the mom activities. There's actually a couple of kids right in my town with very similar diagnoses. So that's nice to have that community. Um, and then my family is very involved. It's part of the reason why we moved back. So they are here a lot to help with my son. We also pay quite a lot for a caretaker who has grown with my son, and she's, goes to all his therapies, so she's very familiar now with how to care for a child with special needs. Um, and then, yeah, all my friends are aware and supportive. So I think having support is probably the most important thing, because it is very hard to raise a kid. It is extremely hard to raise a kid with one diagnosis. It is doubly extremely hard to raise a kid with multiple diagnoses. So I think it is very important to have whatever community that you can gather to help you in your journey.
I think that's really great advice. And I just want to thank you both so much for sharing your journey and sharing your story with HIE and autism. I know that this is going to reach so many families in our community and beyond, and just giving families, more information and being able to learn from someone else and hear someone else's story to, one, make you not feel alone, but also make you, give you some more information to help navigate your own child's journey. So we are going to be ending the recorded session of this, but I just want to thank you both so very much for your time today. And thank you everyone for joining us for this peer perspective panel. See you.